Kaftana Ishlum Falcheris?
Enough of that there, I have no time for that. Straight to the meat and potatoes. Right. Lenition. So let's forget about Irish for a second and just focus on the general mechanics of speech.
Da, da, ed, l, alla, alla, ili, ama, ama, imi, aga, aga.
What we're seeing and hearing here is non-obstructed R followed by obstruction. The obstruction part is what we call the consonant, and the non-obstructed part is what we call vowels. Sorry about that. So let's break this down simply from the start. So air originates in our lungs. It comes up, vibrates some vocal folds, and then escapes where it can, or where we allow it, namely the nose or the mouth. It's what happens to the air on this journey that contains all of the things associated with speech. If we just let that sound and air pass out unobstructed, it will create something we would define as a vowel. For example, a, e, ow. If, however, we fully or partially obstruct the air, where it causes friction and an audible sound, that would be something we would classify as a consonant. So like if it's fully obstructed, it might sound like ka. I'm using kind of the back of my tongue to touch the roof of my mouth to make that sound, consonant sound with that particular quality. I could use my lips to fully obstruct the sound like b, p. I could use my tongue, t. So these are all consonants because they all fully obstruct the sound and the air coming out of our mouth. There's also consonants which just partially obstruct it. So imagine like I could use my lips, but I still let some air out, but it vibrates and it makes a sound. It's still a consonant. F. I could do it inside my mouth with my tongue, like s, s. So these are still consonants. So a consonant, we'll remember, is when we fully or partially obstruct the air. A vowel is where there's no obstruction. So this is crucial, and I think this is what lenition is. This gives us the key to understand intuitively what lenition is. So if you think of some of those consonants like those partially obstructed ones, the technical term doesn't matter, but there's partial obstruction like the S, S, or the V, 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 or V, V, or F. It's pretty similar. You could kind of say they're more vowel-like than the other consonants, like ones that fully obstruct the air. And this is what lenition is. So it's making the consonant more vowel-like, which means obstructing the air and the sound less. So let's get a feel for actually putting this into practice. Here's some random consonants, and here's where they're produced in the mouth in certain words in English. If we consider the sound of the B in the word baby here, we can see that the point of obstruction is the lips. If we look at where the C in cat is produced, we see it's inside the mouth, where the tongue touches the top of our mouth to cause the obstruction. If we want to make these consonants more vowel-like, we will just try to obstruct the sound less. In the case of B, this means the lips won't connect as strongly, or maybe not at all. This change might sound something like this. B, 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 V, 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 B. The B has changed to something resembling an English V sound. If we did the same with C, K, K, cat, then we just make the tongue approach the roof of our mouth less, or maybe not at all, sounding something like this. K, 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 K. The C has turned into something like a hiss, something that maybe you would hear in German. Now, remember, we're still just talking about sounds. We're not talking about specific languages, in fact, English mostly. But what if we had a different quality of, say, B? What about in the word bottle? The way I said, the B is quite low. What would happen if we allowed it to undergo this process? Let's try it. Bo, 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 bottle. Suddenly, that B sounds something similar to an English W. Now let's try a lower C. If I say cat and lower the C to cat, and we now allow that low C to undergo this process, it might sound like this. Cat, ka, 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 cat. And if we do a more forward C sound, like cat, cat, it might sound like this. K, 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 h, 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 cat. So we can see that the quality of the sound after we allow the consonant to undergo this softening depends on how the consonant would normally be produced. Yeah, I have a sneaky suspicion that this stuff that we're doing here is like more like on obstruction stuff. It's actually what's going on in Irish. So for the Greg, we're going to start comparing it to Irish. Maybe it'll be similar. Why am I whispering? So at this stage, we should just have this one simple rule that we can then try to apply to different consonants and see what they sound like. We'll then compare those sounds with the lenited versions in Irish and see how close we are. If we get close without having to remember lots of arbitrary rules and cases, I think that would be a positive benefit. So let's try it. Let's bring up that list again and go through them. If we consider this word,
B,
then we've already done this process and it ended up sounding something like V. V. Let's hear the Irish.
V,
Now, what about this word?
bowl,
We did this process earlier with bottle and it ended up sounding something like a whoa. Now let's hear the native speaker saying it.
a wool,
Hey, they're remarkably similar. If we move on to the next consonant, C, and we remember that the broad C in Irish is produced further back in the throat, like in the previous example when I said cat. In this case, we're going to use this word.
Cooler.
And we know from earlier, using our simple rule of just unobstructing the air, it would end up sounding something like hula. And here's what the native recording sounds like.
hula,
This is taking a long time, so we're just going to blast through the rest of them.
Q,
Q, hue,
Q, deal,
deal, heel,
yield, doon,
doon, roon. That one's a bit different, don't worry about it. The D comes from your throat. It's kind of similar to T, but T doesn't come from your throat. D does. That's why the sound's made by the throat. Don't worry about it. Yo!
roon,
Focal.
Buckle, uckle.
Uckle.
This takes so much clicking and stuff, so I think I'll stop here, but I think you get the point, hopefully, and I hope it's useful. And I think it's pretty cool we can do away with arbitrary rules and just use
A simpler, more intuitive approach.
that. Makes sense to me anyway. So try to do this process on the consonants, depending on how they would sign in the word. And this applies to the sounds at the start of words. In the middle of the words, they can be a little different. But keep listening to the natives, and they'll guide you.
Yes.